Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. This is a very special video. It is the first interview that Russ Croman has given since publishing or making available BlurXTerminator. Now this particular video is an edited one. It is cut down for length to just really capture some of the highlights of our full talk. I would encourage you to look in the description down below. You'll find the link for the full video. And that one I have chapters listed so that you can navigate to all of the very interesting topics. This one is only going to cover a fraction of those topics, and if you just feel like you can't invest that amount of time, watch this one. But if you would really like to understand a number of different areas, including the workflow, how do you use it? These are all the questions that people have about BlurXTerminator. What are best practices with it? Even some of the technical details about neural nets and what to look for in the data, all of that is covered in the full video. But here, I'll also have some chapters down below. You can navigate to some of the highlights of what is in that full form. In addition, I would say that look down below. There's some additional resources that you want to pay attention to. First is, of course, the link to Russ's site, where he has his own frequently asked questions, and you can get a trial version for 30 days. You can try out BlurXTerminator and see if you like it. I suspect that many people have already done so, but if you haven't done so, click that link down below and check it out. You'll also find another link. It is to a video that has been made now more public than it was. It's a talk that Russ gave about neural net architecture, and that addresses a number of questions that people have about how BlurXTerminator works and some of the technical aspects that are around that. So I would encourage you to enjoy this short form of the video, but for the full interview and really all the information, go check out the other one. It's really the one where we put a lot of our effort to really go into some of the other nooks and crannies of what it means to use this really revolutionary deconvolution process. So thank you very much and enjoy the video. All right, ready?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome to the channel. Today, I think, is an exciting interview that I'm going to have with Russ Croman. And as you know, Russ has been producing some really remarkable pieces of software. A couple of months ago, I interviewed Russ, and we talked about star exterminator and noise exterminator. There's another exterminator around, and I think that most people in the astrophotography community are well aware of BlurXTerminator. That's going to be the primary topic that we'll talk about today. There's nothing better than letting the developer have the opportunity to show you himself how the product works and how the software works. So we're going to be doing that today, as well as discussing some of the various elements that can kind of make the working of the software of BlurXTerminator work that much better for your images. And I will add that if you're one of those people who have not heard about BlurXTerminator yet, and you'd like to give it a try, there is a trial version that you can get for 30 days. You can check it out, see how it works. In the description down below of this video, you can click on the link to get a trial version or to just outright purchase it after seeing what we do with it today. That might actually be the reaction. So I'm going to begin by introducing Russ. Russ, thank you very much for joining me again for an interview on the channel. I think that this is kind of the fun thing to do now that you've made something and people are using it. It's part of a conversation. The first question that I wanted to ask you is that this, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, has brought perhaps more attention to you than you've really ever had in the past. And I just wonder, it's been about a month now since you released the software. How are you doing? You must be getting all kinds of queries and questions and success stories and other things. So yeah, tell me, how's it going?
Well, thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me on your channel again. It's good to be back here. Yeah, it's going great, I would say. The response to BlurXTerminator has been a little overwhelming at first. I did not expect that it would that the interest that it attracted would be as much as it was. It's been overwhelmingly positive, lots and lots of positive comments, and I really appreciate that. I I work hard on these tools and I try to get them as good as I possibly can. And so to get that feedback is really nice. The other thing that's nice is, I spend months working on these tools and I stare at their results incrementally improving over that period. And so by the end of a few months, I've maybe forgotten how hard deconvolution was, or maybe I'm less surprised at the results that my tool is producing because I've been staring at it for a long time. So when I release a tool, it's often I've sort of forgotten maybe how good it is, and then to have other people look at it with fresh eyes, that haven't been staring at it for a few months, and to get that feedback is really it's really nice to get that. So thank you for everyone for the positive feedback on that. There's been some controversy as well, and that's been very interesting. I saw a nice article by Patrick Cosgrove today, who kind of analyzed that. And I don't know, Adam, maybe you can put a link to his article or something.
Sure, we can.
It's a really nice breakdown. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope that today, as part of this conversation, I certainly want to ask you the kinds of questions that are typical that people have, and we can address it in a way that I know that you've created docs, and you're going to show the documentation that you've created, as well as the frequently asked questions and things like that. Also today, this will be another link that's down below, is that you made available your talk at AIC, which I found, of course, I was there in the room, extremely enlightening about neural networks in general, and the architecture that you used, in the sense that how you've kind of devised these neural nets, both for the previous applications of StarXterminator, but as I understand it, it's a similar kind of thing here for BlurXTerminator as well.
That's right. Yeah, and a big thanks to the board of the Advanced Imaging Conference for making that video available to just post and link freely. It's been available the whole time since the conference last May, but you had to have create a free login with the Advanced Imaging Conference website. Yeah. So this it makes it a bit more available, a little less friction.
One less step. You just
That's right.
Visit your site and check out that video.
That's right.
So
yeah, it's on my YouTube channel. And the other thing to mention about that video is the neural network architecture that I show in there, the construction of all the layers of the neural network. It's the same between all three tools: NoiseXterminator, StarXterminator, and BlurXTerminator. All use the same neural network architecture internally, and you'll see that gone through in detail in that video. The training, of course, is different.
Right.
And the video talks a bit about that the architecture of the network is almost secondary. What's really important is how the network is trained.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll discuss that a little bit later. But for now, what I'd really like to do is get into having you tell us about the tool itself. I know that you've recently made some improvements, so I'd like you to show us what some of those are, and how they relate to some of the images, and some things to look out for when you're using the tool. I think you can do that better than anyone ever could. So why don't we do that? If you don't mind, why don't you share your screen, bring up BlurXTerminator, and we'll check it out.
All right, you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so before I dive into the images, I've got just a couple of example images here to show the various new settings and whatnot. But before I dive into that, I just wanted to remind everyone where the documentation for BlurXTerminator can be found. It's this little icon right here. It looks like a little dog-eared sheet of paper. And you just click that, and right within PixInsight, it brings up the BlurXTerminator documentation. And there is just a ton of information in here. I spent probably about a week full-time after the software was done putting this documentation together with descriptions on all the parameters that are available, some tips on processing, including sequences of when to apply various processes. There's a ton of information in here, so do take advantage of that. the image I wanted to start with, one of the questions that comes up a lot is what's up with this automatic PSF button, and why are people seeing better results if they go with the manual PSF diameter setting for the non-stellar adjustments. And I picked this image because it's a good example of how manual PSF can work better and give you a more accurate deconvolution result. So let me show that by jumping into the BlurXTerminator preview. And here's the overall image. And let me just kind of select an area that is surrounding what we were looking at there in that preview window. So here we go. Here is, with automatic PSF selected, this is the result that BlurXTerminator, at least a preview of the result that BlurXTerminator is producing. And I don't know if it's immediately obvious, but if I look in, let's say, this area of the galaxy here, and I compare it to what's happening to this area of this spiral arm over here, and I flip back and forth a little bit, it's applying more sharpening in that region.
And just to reiterate, we're looking at the non-stellar sharpening
That's right.
for this effect of the over sharpening part. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe I could make that a little more clear if I just set my stellar sharpening to 0 for this discussion.
Purposes. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So now if I toggle back and forth between these two,
yes,
there is some sharpening happening here, and there's way more happening over here.
Right.
And the reason is because we have a relatively star poor region in this area, which is this area that I'm kind of drawing my pointer around, is larger than a processing tile in BlurXTerminator. So when it comes along and it gets this region here, it really doesn't have any stars to go on to extract the point spread function.
And I think that something that I've seen on the internet is that people will take BlurXTerminator and kind of do what I might call an off-label usage, which is they sharpen it while looking at the image zoomed out, and then they apply what I would think of as an over-sharpened result, only so they do it so that they can see the effect when they are so zoomed out that otherwise you just don't see very much happening. But optimal sharpening, typically you, especially in an image such as this, you would need to be zoomed in somewhat to be able to see what's going on and what might be appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. And keep in mind, deconvolution is a fine scale recovery of information. It's not a large scale recovery of information.
Yeah.
If you want large scale contrast enhancement, it's better to use some other tool.
Yeah.
So, some wavelet processing where you're doing some multi-scale adjustments, or a clarity adjustment in Photoshop, or something like that that's actually handling larger scale changes like that. Deconvolution is always at finer scales. And yeah, maybe this is a good point to show you how I approach this. If I'm going to use manual PSF diameter, how do I do that? And I'll just get rid of the preview here for a second. The way I do this, there's probably multiple approaches. My favorite one is pretty quick and pretty easy. You want to find a few non-saturated stars in the image. And by non-saturated, I mean, if I turn off the screen stretch here, I don't want to see the stars in the unstretched image. If you see those stars, they're starting to get close to saturating the detector, and you're not going to get an accurate PSF extraction. So I've turned the screen stretch back on now. If I just do a dynamic PSF, and I just click on one of these fairly bright, so it can get a good estimate kind of stars, maybe get a couple of them, click on a few of these, and I'll take an average. I'll click this little average button here, and I'll get my full width half max values. So on this image, it's around 6 pixels, full width half max. Right. So that's my procedure, is I just do a quick dynamic PSF.
So as far as the normal stellar adjustments, is there anything that you can add to perhaps, you've worked on some new training and some perhaps improvements to the overall algorithm. I know that the sharpening of stars in particular did change color in the older version of the, and I'd like to maybe even show an example of that, but the older version of the AI, and now that's been improved, right?
Yeah, so the biggest changes, let me break down the changes for the latest release into two pieces. And one piece has to do with AI version 2. So the neural network that's kind of at the core of BlurXTerminator was trained more extensively. So the network received more training. So it's going to give you a more refined result and a more accurate deconvolution. But the biggest change was in the preservation of star colors. And there was an error in how AI version 1 was trained. It was actually sort of an intentional error. There was a feature I was trying to include, which was essentially trying to correct for differences in the halos around stars in the different color channels. And so it would alter the colors of stars as a result on some images. So the biggest change in AI2 is that that attempt to correct for the differences in halo sizes between the different color channels has been removed. And so that's the largest change. And as a result, it does a much better job of preserving the colors of stars. This is part of an image of the Iris Nebula region. Actually, let me just really quickly show the full image. This is the full image that we're working with here. And as you can see, it's a pretty large span. This is taken with an FSQ 106, good telescope, but every refractor, every telescope really, especially with our larger sensors these days, has trouble in the corners. And what I'm doing here is showing just this region up in the corner here, the little
top right, yeah.
If we zoom in on this, you can see that we've got some chromatic aberration, and we've got some coma. Actually, this kind of the stars get fuzzy in this direction back toward the center of the image, and they're sharper away from the center. So we've got both coma and chromatic aberration in this image. And let me just run and kind of go reset back to default parameters here. If I go and do a preview on this, and I zoom in on some of those stars that have chromatic aberration, if I zoom back in here, so again, I've got correct only turned on. If I switch back and forth, the difference is pretty dramatic. Now, that's looking at the stars. If you also look at these little fine features of this nebula, these little fingers sticking out here, you can see that when I go back to what BlurXTerminator is doing to it, you can see that it's making a correction to the non-stellar part of the image as well. The right way to think about this is it's when you're in this correct only mode, it's translating from one point spread function to a different point spread function. So there is a point spread function applied to this part of the image that was as a result of the optics that causes this coma and chromatic aberration. BlurXTerminator is seeing that and saying, oh, look, there's coma and chromatic aberration. I've got correct only selected. Let's take that aberrated point spread function that is both chromatic, so you've got that coma, and it's also different in each color channel because of the chromatic aberration. Let's change that point spread function to a round point spread function and also even it up between the color channels. So that's really what the neural network is trying to do here. And again, if you can see, if I jump back and forth between before and after, it's actually performing a deconvolution on the non-stellar parts of the image. Now, we're not sharpening anything yet. We're just changing from one point spread function to another point spread function. So while we're here, this is probably also a good time to demonstrate the new Luminance only mode. Now, the reason this Luminance only mode is here is as a I mentioned earlier that AI2 is much better at preserving star colors. my original reason for putting this luminance only mode in is as a sort of a backup, is the way to think about it. If there are still issues with preserving star colors or any issue with preserving or altering colors at all, luminance only mode is sort of a force. It forces the issue. So right now we are in the normal mode. So it's looking at the individual color channels and making cross-channel corrections if it sees differences between them. If I put it in luminance only mode, if I switch back and forth here between luminance only mode and the normal mode of operation, this image is a pretty good way to show the differences. Because in luminance only mode, you can see a couple of things. One, it hasn't done anything to the color information. So you're still getting these colored fringes around the stars that are due to chromatic aberration. The other thing to notice is that the deconvolution result is actually different. If I switch back and forth here, because it can't see the difference of the point spread functions between each color channel. It's seeing a combined point spread function that's the result of extracting this luminance information from the data. Function can do.
So thank you, Russ, for showing us, the tool and a little bit about how it works. We can look at some more details. I want to show you some of the images that I've been working on, and I can show you some of the effects that I've seen in my own data. Let me just give you what I have created here as kind of a typical workflow. So you have an integrated, and I'm going to speak about an RGB image here for a moment. So you have an integrated RGB combination image. I had my red, my green, my blue. This could have been a one-shot color camera image. So you'd have a color image. It's in its linear form, of course. This goes without saying. We're doing all of this in its linear form. But I had to do channel combination to create the color image. And then the first thing I do is DBE. I correct for all of the gradients and non-uniformities that are there. Then I do my color correction, and these days it's the spectrophotometric color calibration tool, which is fantastic. It is it only augments what we're able to do now with getting some nice precision and consistent color imagery.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful piece of work that the PixInsight team did. I'm really impressed with SPCC.
And then we have now BlurXTerminator. Linear form, we've corrected for color. And now we can apply the deconvolution that BXT BlurXTerminator does, and then follow it with the other things, some of which might be your own products, such as star exterminator, noise exterminator. I just list etc. because there's, of course, the next panoply of things that you're going to do. I hope you agree that that would be a safe and rational thing to do. What might not be as good would be an order like this, where we do DBE, and then we do the deconvolution. And this would apply to any deconvolution algorithm, but we're talking about BlurXTerminator here. We would do BlurXTerminator before the color calibration. And am I correct in saying that there could be some issues in doing that?
Yes, you are. And you're also correct in saying that this applies to any deconvolution, not just BlurXTerminator. I convinced myself of this by doing a test in using both orders of processing here. Your first line where you do color calibration first, followed by deconvolution, and the second one where you do deconvolution followed by color correction. And I encourage people to do this test themselves. What you'll notice is if you look at the results that SPCC produces, if you do it before or after deconvolution, the key thing to look at is the graphs that SPCC produces, where it shows you all of the different color ratios in the red versus green and blue versus green analysis that it's doing. You'll see that the values that it comes up with for how to balance the color, as well as the scatter or the spread of the data points around those best fit lines, those numbers will generally be worse after doing any form of deconvolution, be it BlurXTerminator or classical Lucy Richardson deconvolution. The scatter will increase quite a bit. The slope may also change, which is really what gives you the change in color.
Now there's the next kind of combination. This is all combinatorial, right? Where we might do the following, and I've seen people online discuss this, where they're going to do DBE, then they'll do the color correction. Now they want to do this thing where their image is noisy, and they want to reduce the noise before applying the deconvolution. And so what would you say to that?
Yeah, this one, so the previous one, it's, as I said, it's kind of an unknown if that's a good idea or not. So let's play it safe and do decon after color calibration. In this case, doing noise reduction, again, it doesn't have to be noise exterminator, any form of noise reduction prior to any form of deconvolution is not a good idea. And the reason for that is deconvolution, essentially what you're doing is recovering very low contrast detail that's in the image. It's actually in the image data, but you're recovering that contrast in that fine scale data. Noise reduction of any form has a tendency, remember, it's reducing noise. So it's acting on fine scale information also. It's trying to only act on the noise component of that, but it can't help but alter the low contrast signal that we're interested in as well.
And then we have, sorry about this. Apparently I did the order here. Yeah, so now it's the third line because I messed up my slide.
Okay.
But the third line is now DBE followed by noise reduction. Then you do then you do BlurXTerminator, and then you do color correction. That can't be good. That's just a bunch of things.
That's bad in all ways.
Okay,
right?
so let's just not even talk about that one.
Yeah, everything's out of order there.
All right, good. So now I'd like to look at some images and see what BlurXTerminator is doing, show some actual images that illustrate some of the ideas that we've been talking about so far. The first thing I'd like to do is actually mention something that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, but has also been something online that has been of particular interest. And I'm going to show a quote here. This quote comes from someone on a very large user group, a forum. And the quote was about BlurXTerminator. And I'm sorry, Russ, it's a very, it's an abrupt quote, but it is, "I must admit I remain genuinely baffled at the huge praise that BlurXTerminator is getting." So having said that, the initial, and he later changed his mind because he understood, but the initial images that he showed on the group look like this. And so here, I shouldn't have moved that image. Sorry. Here are the two images, and I'm going to blink them to show the difference of what BlurXTerminator did to the image. And we can plainly see why he was not very impressed. So this is the before, and this is the after. And the complaint is, of course, that we are definitely getting correction and deconvolution of the stars, but we're not getting very much when it comes to the nebula. In fact, if you zoom out at almost any other level and I blink the images, you would be hard-pressed to see that very much of anything is going on at all. And of course, the idea here is that this image is very, very noisy. And we know it's noisy because we can see the variation. We can literally see the noise, but especially in the color sense, the variation of all of these colors of brightnesses at the level that the nebula, the things of interest, are at. Mm-hmm. And so I found it interesting. This particular person, when he allowed me to use this image, and I thank him very much, he later understood that it's because of this effect that he wasn't able to sharpen. And so I tried to express the idea that he should actually be giving praise to BlurXTerminator in the sense that the fact that it doesn't sharpen noisy information is one of the big benefits of BlurXTerminator. In a traditional deconvolution algorithm, it is agnostic. In fact, it doesn't know when to stop, generally. Most of them will just do their thing iteratively, and usually, unless you take special other precautions, are going to affect the noise, make it a noisier image. You're going to need to mask it. You need to have some kind of local support. You've got to do something to protect things where you don't want the deconvolution to happen. And in this sense, then BlurXTerminator, by not touching this stuff, because it isn't the kind of useful information that we want to really have that deconvolution go to, that is the impressive thing. At least that's what I found impressive about this particular example.
Yeah, you're right. A traditional deconvolution run on an image like this would produce the classic kind of curdled or wormy kind of background.
Exactly. All right. So I wanted to point out then that, there isn't necessarily a number that we might assign to how noisy it is. In fact, when you consider an image in general, there are going to be parts of an image which are going to have low signal noise and other parts which have high signal.
Mm-hmm.
So we want our deconvolution to occur, only where that signal strength is basically good enough. And it's just one of the fundamental rules, if you will, of deconvolution, that we need the proper signal strength there to be able to do the nice things that it does. Now, the other things I wanted to point out, also mentioned, but I wanted to demonstrate here, is something about, I'm going to show this image in a moment. This is the before. I wanted to show something about not matching the stars. So this is two examples of the same image. And the only thing that I've done here is in one, I matched the star sharpening that I did in my RGB compared to my Luminance image. And in the other, I didn't. This is the one where I did not match. If I display this version here, this is one where I am doing a better job of matching. And what you'll find is you'll get this kind of color artifact, of course, around the stars because, it's just not matching. We're blending, a bigger color blob to a much smaller thing in the Luminance image where the deconvolution was so much greater. So I just wanted to mention that that is what it looks like when you have that mismatch. And this applies, not only to the stars, but to other elements of the image as well. This applies to all of the elements of the nebula and everything else that's taking place there everywhere else as well. But that's what it looks like. It isn't exactly the same because I didn't reprocess everything from the beginning. This, I'm zoomed in now to the final result, but this final result compared to what is where we started. So I just want to show the difference in contrast and detail between the LRGB of where I started and then where I ended up. And this does include more of, say, the adjustments that I made for other adjustments that I made. But a majority of this, the primary thing that we're seeing here is the effect of the BlurXTerminator. Mm-hmm. So the question that is often on people's mind is that, what are artifacts here? I am zoomed in 300%, right? 300% of the image size is what I am zoomed in. So this is actually what it was. The intrinsic plate scale of this image is this big, but I'm going to need to zoom in to something more than that in order to kind of even examine where artifacts can be, especially in strong signals. So in this area, we're not talking about noise. We're going to say for the moment that, especially in this very bright area here, noise is minimized. Well, if I were to find some truth data, I would need for this kind of resolution. The data here that I acquired is on the order of an arcsecond or a little bit better, the full width half max of stars, at least initially. And then, of course, with BlurXTerminator, we do even better than that. So what I need to do is find some data that is even remotely close to it. And so this data here is actually from the Gemini 8-meter telescope. And let me be sure that neither of these images match. So give me a moment to... Or maybe they do, and I just don't know. Yeah, they do. Good. By blinking back and forth, they won't be a perfect match. This Gemini data is using narrowband images. It's an 8-meter telescope, but the resolution is, of course, remarkable. And it's going to be much finer resolution than I could achieve with the system that I was using. The thing that I like to do is just look at some of these crazy little details. I mean, I see blobby things in my image, right? I see like these three blobs here, and then I see a thing here, and it has a little finger there. And then I go blink the image, and sure enough, those same features, everything that I see, you can go back and forth here a few times, they are represented in the higher resolution, finer data. Now you can tell that a feature like this, I mean, I see a lump here and I see it's a finger, right? It almost looks like a little box, but it's a finger. And so I look here, I can see the same finger. You can see how the deconvolution of my image would result in something that looks like two fingers. And because it just can't resolve better than that, but these features are all evident in the truth data. These stars here, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you will see those same stars, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll see the same little finger here. The point that I'm making is that in the data that I'm able to examine, I have to look at a level that is on, something like a pixel level for high signal areas to really start to see where any deviations might be. And so I think that really speaks to this idea of getting a consistent kind of result that doesn't have much in the way of artifacts, that it really is a deconvolution of the image. Mm-hmm. So this leads to this idea of another thing, coming back to M88, just to speak to the idea that neural networks, the way in which you train them and the way in which they work, they can do a number of different things. Mm-hmm. Here in this image, I have some feature of M88 here, right? And if I go backwards in time enough, we'll have that same feature fuzzy. But if in my original image, there was truly a gap, because it's just what my image recorded, there was some little gap of information. Now, whether a finer image actually shows that there's a complete spiral arm there or not, BlurXTerminator is not going to fill the gap if in my data the gap was never there. Does that sound pretty close to you?
Yeah, that's very accurate. BlurXTerminator is only going to show recovery of detail where the detail already exists in an image, but at very low contrast. And it's important to think about what happens when you convolve an image with a point spread function. If you have the actual astronomical scene that's out there where all the stars are actually infinitesimally small point sources, and that gets, that plus our galaxy detail, like you've got here in this beautiful image of M88, all that detail has been convolved by some point spread function. When you convolve with a point spread function, it attenuates high spatial frequency information, so fine detail. That's what convolution with a point spread function does. It attenuates the fine detail. It doesn't remove the fine detail. It doesn't completely eliminate the fine detail. That fine detail is still there in your data. It's just been attenuated. It's been made lower contrast in those really fine, from one pixel to the next kind of scales. The contrast has been reduced. And all deconvolution does, all BlurXTerminator does, is see that contrast, that very low contrast detail exists in the image and restores the contrast, trying to get back to what the original scene looked like before it was convolved with our atmosphere and your finite optics and things like that.
And I'm going to put a fine point on this because it is still, there's a small fraction of people that are very vocal about this. Mm-hmm. And you've addressed this in your fact, but we can just state it again, that neural nets can, be trained in such a way that in some way the information that they've been trained on, literally the structures themselves, like if you were trying to recreate someone's hair or something like that, you could try to teach your neural net to actually do that based on the things that it's seen before. The training that you've explained that you're doing in for BlurXTerminator is that we're training it in such a way that it's seeing, structures of space and whatever, but ultimately the operations that are performed don't they're not somehow encoding the literal structures that are there. It's not like putting in place little parts of galaxies or little pieces
Right.
of a nebula. The
Yeah.
way you could imagine saying it, this is the way I would say it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you only trained your program, BlurXTerminator, on a spiral galaxy, literally, and you just like one, I don't know, M51, whatever it is, and then I go try to use BlurXTerminator on some beautiful nebula, like this or something else, what would happen is I wouldn't see that spiral galaxy showing up in my nebula.
Right.
What I
Yeah.
would see is that the nebula just wouldn't sharpen very well because the structures that the training program saw that were later convolved, and then it needs to figure out how to sharpen those things. Those operations don't exist. That undoing operation doesn't exist because it was never trained to do that, to see that kind of information. So it's not going to deconvolve my nebula very well. It's not that I'm going to start to see little galaxy parts in my nebula or something like that.
Right. That's exactly right. And it really does come down to your networks will do whatever they're trained to do. If you give them enough capacity to learn and you give them the right set of training data, you could teach one to turn dogs into cats or to synthesize artificial faces. And we've all seen examples like that. But those networks were trained to be very inventive. If we wanted to train a astronomical image processing tool to paste in missing detail, we would train it by removing detail from an image, having the network process that, and then showing it what it should have put in where the missing detail was.
Right.
That's how we would train that. And that's not how BlurXTerminator is trained. BlurXTerminator is trained simply and only on, you've got a sharp image, some, very sharp, very detailed astronomical image that gets blurred to create an input image for the network. It gets blurred by some point spread function that has some diameter, some characteristics, and that's it. We take a sharp image, we blur it, and that's the input training image for the network. And all the network learns to do is to take the blurry image and recover the low contrast information to try to get as close as it can to that sharp original image. That will be limited by how much noise is in the image. Like we talked about earlier, there's a fundamental information theory limit there, where when that detail gets so low contrast that it's, the noise is overwhelming it, it's much larger, it can't recover it anymore. But beyond that, that's all it's doing. Is it's doing two things. It's recognizing what point spread function the image has been blurred by, and then using that information to deconvolve the input blurry image into an output deconvolved image. And it can only do that, the way the network is trained, it can only do that based on information that's actually in the image. So it can't invent any detail. And you're absolutely right.
Another really good example of this is a VDB4. It happens to be I was on a VDB thing recently. I wanted to revisit some of this data, some of this nebulosity. Here you can see just how, there wasn't a good way to handle these stars because there wasn't a way to deconvolve them in a reasonable way anyway. With traditional methods, you just couldn't, with all of the stars in the field, somehow fix them all. But with BlurXTerminator, that's made easier. And so I can be more aggressive with, the deconvolution of the stars, which makes working with the nebulosity again that much easier. And so in the same vein as I showed a moment ago, this is the same field, the same data, but now, made and processed in such a way that 10, 20 years ago, whatever, I couldn't even come close to this.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it really is, as I made in my first video, it really is a revolution in the way in which astronomical images, especially in astrophotography as amateurs do it, it can be done. It's just really remarkable to be able to do this. So with that, I just want to say, geez, thanks, Russ. This is good stuff. It makes it fun. And I think that's an element that people can really, grab onto. When you start processing, there's a lot of technical stuff, and there are a lot of things, a lot of little things you got to worry about getting right, because if you do one thing wrong, you know, the whole thing falls apart. But at the end of the day, when you have some things that work like this to, you know, dramatically improve images, that brings in fun, that makes it worth kind of some of the tedium that you have to do as well.
Well, that's wonderful. And those are some wonderful examples. And I tell you, that is the most gratifying thing about working on these tools is the beautiful images that we're seeing that are, you know, like these are just wonderful examples of, you know, unlocking the potential of what's in the data that we've all taken, just being able to recover that detail and the color and the subtlety and the beauty of these objects is just it's very, very pleasing to see that these tools are helping with that.
Well, Russ, that was amazing. That was a lot of information about BlurXTerminator and some elements of both how to use it and of course, the results are always spectacular to look at. I want to remind people that, again, in the description down below this video, they can visit, you know, your website through the link and get a free trial if you haven't already started fiddling with it to see how it works. You know, just go grab it and see what you think of BlurXTerminator on your own images. And you know, that was it. That's what I wanted to do here, Russ. Thank you very much for coming on the channel and spending so much time to go through this and to explain all about the new features and functions of it.
You bet, Adam. It was my pleasure. And thanks again for having me on the channel and giving me an opportunity to, you know, explain some of the nuances and the subtlety of using this tool. You know, yes, this tool has made deconvolution easier, but deconvolution is still a complicated topic, and there's a lot of detail that needs to be thought about when using any deconvolution tool. So it was great to have an opportunity to describe some of those things. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I shouldn't, you know, if I were to be a good interviewer here, I should ask you, there might be other creative things in that mind of yours that are on the horizon. Is there anything you want to tease the world with?
I don't have anything that is far enough along yet where I could say this is coming. I am giving some thought to an AI-based gradient removal method tool. That's been probably the most frequently requested tool. Is, you know, call it Gradient Exterminator AI or something like that. It's just ideas at this point. I have not started coding anything. Having done the BlurXTerminator project, there are a number of new techniques that were developed during that project that can easily be applied to that problem. So I do have some ideas, but first in priority is to apply some of those new techniques. There's some neural network architecture nuances and things like that that need to be applied or could be very well applied to star exterminator and noise exterminator. So next in priority is an update to those tools using some of those new techniques that were developed for BlurXTerminator. So I look forward to doing those in the next, probably be in the next few months that both of those updates would be done. I'm starting work on them soon, but look forward to presenting those updates as well.
I look forward to playing with more stuff. And of course, given the opportunity, I'd love to have you on the channel again to talk about all the new things that you've made. So again, Russ, thank you very much for joining me, and out there, clear skies.